On a day when top seeds were named by the committee, has the number one overall seed been claimed already because a statement road victory was made by the Auburn Tigers?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the 7th installment of Locked On College Basketball Game Night, where we get to talk about the nitty-gritty of the games we saw this weekend, give you live reactions, and much, much more. I'm Leaf Tulane, host of Locked On NBA Big Board, credentialed NBA draft analyst, contributor to Locked On College Basketball, and I'm excited to host a show about what I love most, Saturdays, chock full of college hoops, the good and the bad, and we'll talk about both today. Thanks for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tonight's show is presented by FanDuel. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Like I said, right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So in the first segments, I'll break down the clash in the Iron Bowl. 1 versus 2, Auburn versus Alabama. And for the first time ever, one has won. Pretty crazy that the 5 times prior, the 2 seed had won. And this was as big a claim of, yeah, we're that team as there's been in quite a long time. In the second segment, I'll discuss the massive clash that had Houston seize control of the Big 12. And then I'll talk about another game from the Big 12 in which I attended, where we saw a blue blood go down and look horrible. And in the final segment, I'll discuss 2 massive road wins against the big-time Big Ten schools that were hosting, played well offensively, but only for so long. In Purdue losing and Illinois losing, both at home in games that they were favored by around 6 points each. So let's dive right in. First things first, 1 versus 2. Auburn went into Tuscaloosa. They're the number 1 team, and people were thinking, well, why isn't Alabama number 1? Because they won last week, and Auburn and Duke lost. Yeah, Auburn put an end to that thought pretty quickly. They took care of business and imposed their will on the game. They dominated, never giving up the lead, never once, despite a 10-0 surge from Bama that tied the game at 68. It's a great surge. Alabama and Auburn both had one 10-0 run each. And frankly, at no point in this game did I think Alabama was the better team, even in that 10-0 run. Auburn was more connected. They were better on both sides of the ball, and it showed early to build that lead and again in critical moments. And they can do it in a flash with many runs, even if they weren't 10-0 kill shots per Evan Mia, but they're quick, and it's not all Johni Broom. You think, oh, Johni Broom's the best player, and he was. He outdueled Mark Sears in a big way. But Auburn's hardest to beat when Tahad Pettiford, when Chad Baker-Mazara are going well. So both of those guys came off the bench because Chad Baker-Mazara is dealing with an injury. Pettiford's come off the bench all year. They combined to score 28. It's hard to beat. Now, Denver Jones had 16, Chaney Johnson had 13, and Miles Kelly had 14. And then you go to the guy who's in the running for National Player of the Year, Johni Broom. Oh, yeah, he had a ho-hum 19 and 14. And I still don't think Johni Broom is quite right from his ankle injury against South Carolina. Like, he just doesn't quite have the lift. But he hit threes from the get-go, and the amazing balance of Auburn enabled Auburn to pull away and never really be in jeopardy of losing this game. Like, they didn't give up a lead against the number 2 team in the country, who was favored to win this, by the way. They were favored by 1.5 points, closed at 2, I want to say. And Auburn overwhelmed them. Alabama gave their best shot. The game was played probably at Alabama's pace, but Auburn was better on offense. And honestly, I think that Alabama runs good offense. They get good shots, but they don't get shots for the right players. They're insistent to shoot threes, but they don't shoot threes with players that are good at shooting threes. I'll get to that thought in a moment. As for Auburn, they had amazing balance like I talked about, and they often do when they're playing their best. But the crazy thing is, they're this dynamic offensively, and they're this able to, even when the game gets tight, execute and get good shots without a guy that I believe is a true point guard. Denver Jones played well. Tahad Pettiford played well. Neither are true point guards. Both can be true. This Auburn side still executes when it matters, gets good shots when they want to, and they have this dynamism about them. When they get hot, they get sizzling. And And their offensive metrics are through the roof, unbelievable. And yet, I still think at their core, they're a defensively oriented team. When they buckle down, they're among the very best in basketball. And that's the scary thing, that they're the number one offense through most of this year. And yet, I still think they're better on defense. Like, they made a statement and said, yeah, pencil us into the Final Four, barring injury. Yeah, stuff can happen. They can lose. They could lose. But they made a statement saying, we'll go into our rival school's home gym, number 2 in the country, and never give up a lead. Unbelievable stuff from Auburn. At no point did I think Alabama, who is a number 1 seed, they were the number 2 overall seed in today's committee's rankings. They gave out the top 16 seeds. At no time did I think the team that was favored in this game and was at home and is a number 1 seed was better. That's crazy to think about. Auburn was more cohesive. They were very athletic in their way they played defense, and they ran better offense. Alabama actually did an excellent job rebounding. They won the rebounding battle and were dominant on the glass. Alabama showed up in the physical department, but they just don't have it in the same way that Auburn does. Auburn is a better team, a more connected team than Alabama. Broom was the best player out there, and it showed from the get-go. He hit threes to start, and then everyone else eased in. But Auburn wasn't bothered by Alabama's plus size and athleticism because they're more powerful. They're more sturdily built. They get to places on the floor. And though Alabama gets good looks, it's not for the right shooters. So Auburn shot 40% from three. Bama shot 19%. And the frustrating thing is that's not new this season. However, I got a fun stat for you. Before the new year, Alabama was making 31% of its threes, which is good for 246 nationally. But since the calendar went to 2025, they were knocking down 38%, which ranks 40th. More specifically, over the last 10 games, Alabama shooting 39.8, so nearly 40. That's 99th percentile per college basketball analytics. And that's on above the break threes and 38% from the corners. Strangely, it's usually the opposite way. Corners are easier than above the break. So that's about a 5% upgrade in each category, corners and above the break, from 34% and 33% respectively. However, in this game, Mark Sears, your All-American, went 4 of 17 and 2 of 11 from three. Alabama shot a ton of threes, but they weren't shooting with great shooters, and their best player had a stinker of a game in the biggest game of the year. Alabama shoots tons of threes, and they're not great at it, and they're not even good at it, and their personnel dictates they probably shouldn't shoot as many as they do, but that's what makes them so dangerous. That makes them so hard to beat when they're on. But if they're off, do they have an antidote, excuse me. I believe they do have an antidote, and that's Mark Sears getting the free throw line. Grant Nelson going downhill. But they play these big dudes that clog the paint and make it hard to do so, or they space those big dudes out who aren't naturally good shooters. They're talented, but they're not that great. And the big guy who has been stepping up enormously and helping that three-point department, especially since the injury ended the season of Latrell Wrightsell, it's been Chris Youngblood. And Youngblood was pedestrian today. He was fine. He had a huge shot to tie the game up at 68, but that's about all you got. Youngblood had 8 points, and that's all you're getting. Phylon, 10 points. They were the standouts offensively in terms of efficiency. I guess Youngblood wasn't, but he made 3 or 4 free throws, which made him look a little better. Nelson was fine. He had 12 and 12, but that just didn't compare to the arsenal of weapons that Auburn possessed and showed what they can do. So I think you saw that the best team in college basketball resides in the state of Alabama, but it's not the Crimson Tide. It's the Auburn Tigers. Auburn has lost to Duke and it's lost to Florida, but has beaten. So those are 2 1 seeds that they lost to. One of them was at home against Florida, and Florida outplayed them, but Johni Broom was the worst game of the season for him. And credit to Florida. And they had a really good game plan, and they won that game. Duke, they played at Duke, and it took a lightning strike from Isaiah Evans hitting 6 straight threes to turn the tide at Cameron Indoor Stadium. I think the best team in college basketball is still the Auburn Tigers. And I think they made a real claim and said, you know what? We had a bad game against Florida. We're back. All right, coming up next, we head to the Big Ten. We're going to head to the Big 12. Now let's go to the Big Ten. We'll go to the Big Ten instead, where a few teams with high expectations were upset at home. But first, a word from Factor. Looking to optimize your nutrition for this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to eat and heat in just 2 minutes. That's right, heat and eat. You can do both in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab and go snacks to keep you fueled all day, every day. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. And I actually can tell you, I recently tried their Protein Plus meals, and they were packed with flavor and kept me full throughout the entire day. The convenience is unbeatable. There's no prep time, no mess, just great food made in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/locked on 50 off and use the code locked on college 50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. Who doesn't love free shipping? That's code locked on college 50 off at factormeals.com/locked on college 50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. All right, we're going to go to the Big Ten, like I said. I know it took a little deliberation, but let's talk about this. Purdue rarely loses at Mackey. Unbelievable home floor. They just came off a loss in which they led for about 34 minutes against Michigan, got out dueled late, and suffered a bad loss. It wasn't a bad loss in terms of resume. Michigan was a top 4 seed. Wisconsin's a 3 seed per the bracketology that came out today. But it's just not a good loss when you're leading or a good loss when you're at home. Purdue rarely loses at home, and that's the reason I believed that they might sneak out the Big Ten title, despite me not believing they're the best team in the conference. I don't think they are. I never have, but I felt like they're the most difficult to beat at their home floor, and that matters. But Wisconsin stormed into Mackey and shredded apart the Boilers' defense, destroyed them, shot 62% from the field, 40% from three, 72% from the field in the second half. And they shot a million free throws, so that doesn't even do justice to how frequently they scored. Trey Kaufman-Renn, for the Boilers side, was spectacular. He was unreal. Braden Smith was pretty good, created a lot of shots for teammates. But that's only 2 guys. Fletcher Lawyer had 10 points early in the game and was relatively quiet until the very final minutes where it didn't matter very much. He's inconsistent at best. Then there's no one else. There's no one else. How they wish they could have a Lance Jones. How they wish they could have a Mason Gillis. But Camden Heide, Miles Colvin, Jakari Harris, Cox, no one's doing anything. And Colvin hit a few threes late, but it was too little too late. Wisconsin was great offensively because Purdue can't guard very well, but Purdue's kind of known that. I know their metrics are fine, but individually they do not have great individual defenders, and they didn't protect the rim, and they kept fouling, and Wisconsin was dynamic from 3. I mean, Wisconsin, here's a fun fact for you. Wisconsin just became the first team to shoot 60+% and commit 3 or fewer turnovers in a road game since 2010. That's 15 years. And they were the first to do it against a team that has a 2 seed by their name. I'm here to tell you, Purdue's fraudulent. They're not very good. They're so reliant on 2 players. And even then, those 2 players, when you play against the big boys, they've been very good. And you could still argue that the other teams got a duo that played better. It may not be statistically the case, but I mean, John Tonje got whatever shot he wanted at the end of the game, and that mattered more than the very hard work Trey Kaufman-Renn did to score and keep Purdue even competitive. And mind you, this was on their home court. It'd be a different thing if it was at Wisconsin. Wisconsin showed they're an elite offensive team, which you may not associate with Wisconsin, but Greg Gard's adapted. Like, this is an offensive ball club right now. They shoot a lot of threes. They have good guards. John Tonje scores in a very high level. Like, he gets to the rim, he draws fouls, and he hits threes. They shoot a bunch of threes with Klesmit. Blackwell gets to the rim. I mean, they still have Steven Crowell. Winter adds a dynamic element of a stretch 4, and they have depth. Wisconsin's pretty good, but my big takeaway was Purdue's vulnerable, and if they're on a 2 line, I don't think they're going that far. mean, draw matters, but every time they've played a team that's more athletic than them or has more dynamic scoring than them, the one that scores more easily than they do, they've lost. Texas A&M went and played this in the state of Indiana. It wasn't at Mackey, but they were outdone by Texas A&M. Texas A&M's turned into a 2 seed. I get all that, but every time they've played a team that I think is pretty good, Michigan beats them at the end of the game. They just don't have the horses. Michigan's idea, what was it? Oh, yeah. It was put a second body on the ball and force the ball out of the hands of Braden Smith. And then when Trey Kaufman-Renn gets on the short rail, step up and make him pass. Make Caleb First beat you from the drop and score on a dunk or a layup over the top of your center. Make Colvin, make Heidi hit open threes. And they don't. So I'm out on Purdue. And that's nothing new. But Wisconsin's pretty darn good. But you just don't see Purdue lose those games when they're favored by 6 at Mackey Arena. Now, here's a team that was favored by 6.5. Doesn't come in ranked, but was riding high. Feel like they fixed a lot of things. The Illini. They came into this game 6.5-point favorites against Michigan State, who was reeling a little bit. Teams had figured out how to slow them down. You know, you pack the paint, make them shoot threes, and you defend, and you try to keep them out of transition. That's the recipe to beat Michigan State. And as for the team in orange, it's all about how streaky they are. They were shooting so many threes that I don't think it was great for them. Similar to Alabama, they had shooters that aren't great shooters shooting threes, and they didn't make them. So they started going more inside. They changed their starting lineup. They played more dynamic players, took out Trey White and Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, played a little bit more of a veteran team that fit together better and played through their stars. And Kasparis Yakachonis is healthy once more. So they lead. They hit a big bucket. They have a go-ahead basket with 8:29 to go to put them up 65-64 and didn't score for the final 8:29 of the game. I mean, that's stunning. Absolutely insane. Credit to Michigan State, but Illinois missed their last 19 shots, failing to score a single point for 8.5 minutes, while Michigan State closed on a 15-0 run and coasted to a victory by the end. I mean, Michigan State's always balanced. Like, there's nothing new there. They were balanced. They played hard. They got shots that are not necessarily the ones that the metrics and the analytics tell you to take, but they got shots. They executed. They had effort. They played in transition. But really, I think this just says more about Illinois is how streaky they are. Illinois is extremely streaky. They can hit a bunch of threes, and they look like a very, very difficult team to beat, a team capable of making a Final Four. Their analytics are still very good. Like, you don't see Illinois. Frankly, you don't see teams that are on the seed line Illinois is going to be on, which in my opinion is a 6 or a 7, have as favorable of analytics as they do. They're 14th in offense and 30th in defense. And of the past 15, 20 champions, that's kind of the barometer. I know everyone says top 20, but there's more exceptions to that rule than you think. But the real thing is you got to be top 22 in offense and top 35 in defense, I'm pretty sure is basically what it was. And even Baylor a couple of years ago, which was one of the best teams that I've ever seen, they got COVID, and then they looked like they had no legs for like 3 games in the season. Anyway, their metrics were best on offense and like 45th on defense. So those things, it's a really good guideline. Illinois is the 20th ranked Ken Palm team, and they're a 6 seed, but you don't see teams with that combination of being good on each of them, like very good on offense and quite good on defense. That's rare. Illinois is actually falling apart defensively. They were in the top 10, but they're boom or bust. They're a really interesting team that I wouldn't want to play in my side of the bracket, but at the same time are completely vulnerable to being upset early. Well, a team that will expose any vulnerability because they are vicious, they are tenacious, is the Houston Cougars. Houston is as tough as it gets, and we're going to talk about how they seized the Big 12 with a huge road win at McHale in Arizona, along with talking about some other big upsets in the world of college basketball in our final segment coming up next. When the game night tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no place better to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, You can place live bets throughout the game. And even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. For example, I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NFL, and much, much more. All righty, welcome back to Locked On College Basketball Game Night. I'm Leaf Tulane, and I just got back from a Big 12 basketball game, but it was not the most important, but we will touch on it because a big-name team went down. But what we're going to talk about is Houston. Houston is tenacious. They're very stout defensively. For years, they've been analytics darlings. They're a team that defensively is unbelievably stout, setting records a couple years ago. And then offensively, the analytics are more favorable than the eye test. They don't score easily, but they score efficiently. Well, right now, they're 10th on offense and 3rd on defense. For reference, last year, Houston was 2nd on defense and 19th on offense. So not all that different, but not exactly the same. Houston was able to overcome a very physical, a large team in Arizona with momentum, playing some of the better ball of the season that led early, and they out-toughed Arizona, which is not the biggest surprise, and that's not even a slight to Arizona, which it has been in this past, because this is a tough team in Arizona. But they went to McHale, first time in McHale, and were able to out-execute and out-physical an Arizona team that's playing their best basketball and has the physical size and shot making that can be difficult for a team like Houston. Teams that can match up with Houston tend to make it difficult for Houston because they're not as bothered. Think of Alabama beating them on a neutral floor because Alabama has athletes and they score. Well, Houston is better offensively than they have been. I think they found a better identity through the improvement of Milos Uzan because he's been able to be very consistent, offer a scoring threat, a facilitator that he wasn't early in the year, and Houston's improved through it. Their losses have been in overtime ever since the loss to Auburn. They lost in overtime to Bama, overtime to San Diego State. You look at, and then overtime to Texas Tech, which was an awesome game. But you look at all that, and you say, well, they're playing close games. Like, are they good in close games? Today, they prove they are. They found the identity. They knocked down big shots. LJ Cryer came up huge in a big moment when his team needed it most, hit 2 straight threes that opened up the door for Houston to pull away from Arizona. And I thought Arizona played well. They played to their identity of being tough, big, play in transition. But Houston has a culture that's undeniable and a culture of toughness and not giving up. They were able to battle through the adversity of falling behind at Arizona, through having Arizona have 7-2 Henry Vasar, as well as a bruiser in Tobe Awaka that limits the effectiveness of Jaywan Roberts, who likes to get to his left hand and put the game away, get in there. They have the athletes and defensively oriented wings that can trouble the likes of Emmanuel Sharp, who wasn't overly effective. LJ Cryer was quiet for much of the game, but Milos Uzan, and the rest of the Houston side found a way to win with their defensive stoutness and ability to score. And honestly, I had planned to say I don't believe in Houston. I had planned to say I don't think Houston is all that much of a true contender because I didn't at the start of the year. But I'm starting to think, especially of all the 2 seeds that were listed in the bracketology today, for reference, the 1 seeds were Auburn at the 1, Alabama, Duke, Florida. The 2s were Tennessee, Texas A&M, Purdue, and Houston. Houston was the lowest rated 2, and to me, they're clearly the best 2. Defensively, unbelievably stout. Offensively, better than you'd anticipate. And that's because they're not just an analytically solid offense. they're actually knocking down threes at a far higher clip, and it makes for the recipe of defending and getting extra possessions through turnovers by forcing turnovers and grabbing offensive rebounds more potent because they'll knock down threes to punish you. Arizona actually looked pretty good to me. Iowa State's starting to get better with Milan Momcilovic, and Texas Tech is an offensive juggernaut. They lost to Arizona. But Houston went into Arizona and sealed the deal in the Big 12. I'm calling it already. They have one loss, and it was an overtime loss. Houston's now got three, or Arizona's now got three. Iowa State came into this game in fourth. Texas Tech a little bit behind as well. And the team in the fifth, I watched them today, the Kansas Jayhawks. That's a blue blood, blue as blue gets. And they suck. They're terrible. Kansas is awful. Utah is terrible too. But they played with heart. Utah played with heart and effort and determination, and they got shots that they wanted because they worked hard on execution, and they battled. They got every 50-50 ball, every single one. Kansas still had a chance to win this game because there's so much vastly more. I mean, they're more at everything. They're better at everything. They have more height. They have more shooting. They have better point guard play. They have more bodies that can contend at a high level. They have more players that deserve to be at the Power 5 level. They have better everything. They have a better coach, and that's not a slight to Craig Smith, but Bill Swelf's one of the best coaches in college basketball. And yet, they amount to nothing. Kansas had the worst performance I have ever seen in a game I've attended live. And I've been to a lot of games. So I have credentials to Utah, and I go to the games, and Utah's not very good. I'm not expecting very much. Kansas could really use a nice win, help their season along, get a win, confidence boost as they head into the tournament, right the ship. And from the get-go, they were horrible. Hunter Dickinson, he always has a decent stat line, but I've never seen an All-American caliber player, the way he's regarded, play worse. Missed about 7 layups. Got out-hustled by an under-talented, not very good center who went 0 of 7 from the free throw line and lost in Lovering. Lovering won the game against Hunter Dickinson without being very good, and it's just because he tried. DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams, we've considered winners forever, and they're the only two that looked like they cared about wearing Kansas across their chest. AJ Storr, they paid millions of dollars for him, and he was on the bench the entire game. Like, it does not make any sense. Rylan Griffin hit a few shots, but he was minus 15 on the court because he kept getting torched defensively. This is a guy who was a defensive stopper on a Final Four team. I don't know what's happened, but I think there's a few teams that buy their team and lose culture, and that's what's happened in Kansas. And I'm not so sure that Bill Self hasn't given up. Like, Flory Badunga was energetic. He wasn't great in the game. KJ Adams wasn't very good in the game, and DeJuan Harris wasn't all that good. But they at least cared. Play them. Like, this I implore Bill Self to play the guys who care, because either he's given up on the team or the team's given up, or both. Because credit to Utah to get a 74-67 win over Kansas. It's a marquee win and brand name, but not in terms of what was on the court. Sell your stock in Kansas if you have any. And this is a team that came in number 1 in the country coming into the year and beat Duke. Duke would beat them by 60 right now. I've never seen a worse game from a blue blood in my life. So credit to Utah, but Kansas stinks. You know, another game that might even be more surprising, considering they just went to Creighton and got their first win in Omaha. UConn, the 2-time defending national champions, they lost to Seton Hall. Seton Hall has been bad this year. UConn came into this game, I think they came in overconfident. And the craziest part is they were up 7. Utah was leading Kansas wire to wire practically. UConn was up 7 with a minute to go and lost to Seton Hall, who's at the bottom of the Big East. And UConn had just righted the ship, had beaten Marquette on the road and had beaten Creighton on the road, and they lost to Seton Hall. I didn't get to watch much of this game, but what you do know about this game is UConn's vulnerable. They're beatable if you can stop their flowing offense, make the game physical. Seton Hall does that. And at the end of the game, they out-executed UConn, who had turnovers in the biggest moments where the best teams don't make those mistakes. They make their free throws. They don't turn it over when the other team presses and is trying to get the ball back because you're leading by a possession or two. And UConn's made those mistakes this year. We've seen them lose to Colorado, who's in the bottom of the Big 12. We've seen them lose to the bottom of the Big East. This is a team I think is dangerous, and I would not want to face if I'm a 1 seed, but UConn's an 8 seed. Maybe they get up to a 7, but I think they'll probably be around a 7 or an 8 seed. And that speaks to the vulnerability of a team that we expect to be dominant. Like, you're seeing teams in this NIL era transform quickly, some for the good, some for the bad. And I think the pressure is mounted on certain teams. And UConn's been able to be scouted because they don't have the talent level that made it so hard for teams to raise out, scout their preferences away, because they just punish you in a different way. They said pick your poison. This year, you can pick what you want to do, and one of the options may not be poisonous. I mean, it's a crazy day in sports. You watch these teams. North Carolina got a much-needed win against Syracuse. It was close. Duke blasted Stanford. Florida this is a fun story, actually. Florida got Micah Hanlockton back, and he's been out with an injury that he sustained in the SEC championship last year, a gruesome leg injury. He's out. Alex Condon goes down last game against, who did they play? Florida goes into a game against Mississippi State, and they're missing Elijah Martin last week. And all of a sudden, 30 seconds in, Condon's clutching at his leg, and he's in pain. It's an ankle injury. He's out for a while. And they're missing a big, and Sam Alexis is out this week. And he unselfishly burns his red shirt and says, yeah, we're competing for a national championship. I'll do what it takes to compete with this team and go out there for my brothers. And Florida gets a handy win. They win. They take care of business, as does Auburn, as does Duke. You're seeing the cream of the crop differentiate themselves. And I'm not saying that it's negatively about Alabama, but the teams that you're going to think, hey, we can win a national championship about, are showing that right about now. All righty, that'll do it for Locked On College Basketball Game Night tonight. It's always a pleasure. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Thank you for making this your first listen. With your next listen, check out the teams that battled in Locked On Bama and Locked On Auburn. Zach Blackerby will be thrilled about what happened on the road in Tuscaloosa. His Auburn Tigers took a massive win and proclaimed themselves as the best. So tune into his show and make sure to leave your comments below about your thoughts on my big reactions to these games. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening, and we'll be back next week.